cheesecake. Rich, velvety, creamy, tart, and oh so gorgeous. Cheesecake is my favorite dessert. Let's make it keto. Before you do anything, it's really important that you bring all of your ingredients to room temperature. At least 2 hours ahead of time, take your ingredients out of the fridge and let them warm up. The reason being, cold ingredients are dense and rigid, so when you try to mix them up, instead of blending homogeneously, they tend to clump together, which can leave your final cheesecake with chunks of unblended cream cheese. Warm ingredients are softer, so they blend and disperse more smoothly, creating a perfectly uniform, creamy texture for your final cheesecake. Don't skip this step. If you're short on time, or if you forgot to do so ahead of time, you can soften your cream cheese in the microwave. It's not a perfect replacement for coming to temperature naturally, but it'll do in a pinch, and it's certainly better than trying to make a cheesecake with cold ingredients. A trick for quickly bringing your eggs to room temperature is to soak them in warm tap water for 2 or 3 minutes before starting. But really, you're making a cheesecake. It's going to take hours of cooking, chilling, and waiting before you can eat it anyway. So plan ahead, take your time here, and do it right. The first thing we're going to make is the crust. Start by preheating your oven to 300 degrees. Then, for dry ingredients, you're going to need almond flour, a keto-friendly sweetener, I'm using Brown Swerve, kosher salt, and cinnamon. For wet ingredients, you'll need melted butter, a beaten egg, and vanilla extract. Go ahead and combine your dry ingredients together in a small bowl. Normally I'd recommend sifting, but we're trying to emulate a craggly graham cracker crust here, so little uneven chunks aren't a bad thing. For your sweetener, I recommend using Brown Swerve to really help create that familiar texture and taste. The stickiness inherent to Brown Swerve helps the other ingredients clump together, making for a bit more crumble in our final crust. If you can't find it, or don't want to buy it special, don't worry, any erythritol will still work just fine. You just won't have quite as coarse a crumb in the end result. Give your dry ingredients a quick whisk. If you have large chunks of Brown Swerve that aren't mixing, you can crumble them up with your fingers to get a little more even texture. After that, combine your wet ingredients and give them a quick whisk. Add them into your dry ingredients and whisk them together. I switched to a rubber spatula midway through. Your final texture should be thick and a little tacky, like so. Next, we're going to prepare our springform pan with parchment paper and butter so that our cheesecake comes out cleanly and doesn't stick. Here's an easy tip to round parchment paper for your pan. Cut a sheet a little larger than your pan. Then fold your parchment paper, not once, not twice, but thrice, to make a cone. Line it up with the center of your pan and give it a little snip along the circumference. Unfold it, and voila! To prep your pan, brush its base with some melted butter so the parchment sticks. Then, fold out your circular sheet of parchment and spread butter on top of it also, along with the sides of your pan. Some people put an additional ring of parchment around the outside of the pan too, which can make for a more uniform edge to your final cheesecake. But in my testing, compared to just butter, it hasn't made a significant enough difference to justify the effort, so I usually just skip it. Take your crust mix and spread it into the pan, evening it out with a rubber spatula. Then, to make sure it's not too high in any one spot, take a glass spritzed with some non-stick spray and tamp down your crust so it's even. Put that in the oven, and you're going to want to bake that for around 15 minutes or until golden brown. While that's going, we can begin preparing our filling. For the filling, we're going to need cream cheese, sour cream, heavy cream, powdered keto-friendly sweetener, I'm using powdered swerve, xanthan gum, more on that later, the juice and zest of a lemon, vanilla extract, eggs, and one special ingredient, mascarpone cheese. Let's talk about that. Mascarpone cream cheese has a higher fat content than traditional American cream cheese, and is made with just tartaric or citric acid instead of lactic acid bacteria. So when compared to your traditional block of Philadelphia, it's a little creamier, a little softer, and it lacks that traditional tang you might be used to. We wouldn't want to make a whole cheesecake out of it, but making a third of our cream cheese mascarpone can really up the creaminess factor and make for a denser, more velvety, melt-in-your-mouth texture in the final cheesecake. If you can't find mascarpone cheese, or if you like your cheesecakes to have a little stiffer, more whipped, fluffier texture, you can substitute the mascarpone with another block of traditional cream cheese, and the recipe will still work just as well. When it comes to mixing, less is more. You want to mix your cheesecake ingredients just until smooth and no further. Overmixing incorporates air into the batter, which can ruin the final texture. Trapped air bubbles in your cheesecake batter will expand and rise when heated, causing uneven cooking and ultimately cracks in the top. Normally, I would use a stand mixer with a paddle attachment to do all this in because of its increased power and control. But those are hard to film, so I'm using a hand mixer. Start out by putting your sour cream in the largest bowl you have and beat that for a few seconds to lubricate your beaters and bowl. If you don't add the sour cream first, your cheeses will stick to the side of the bowl, which will require more mixing to blend them evenly, which, again, we want to avoid. Once everything's nice and lubricated, we're going to add our cheeses and our sweetener. And for this, you really need to use a finely powdered sweetener. The granulated stuff won't work here. Unlike regular sugar, granulated erythritol doesn't dissolve when exposed to moisture. So if you use it here, your final cheesecake will get a slightly sandy, gritty texture. Powdered erythritol is a much finer particle, so it blends more smoothly. If all you have is the granulated, you can powder it yourself in a coffee or spice grinder. 1 or 2 minutes is all you need to get the right consistency. So go ahead and blend in your sweetener and cheeses thoroughly. Make sure to scrape down the sides every so often with a rubber spatula so that you get even mixing throughout. Add your lemon zest, lemon juice, vanilla extract, xanthan gum, and heavy cream, and mix those together until just combined. The xanthan gum can be omitted if you don't have it, but it takes the place of cornstarch in traditional cheesecakes, which is used as a thickener and stabilizer to help prevent the cheesecake from cracking in the oven. As for the lemon juice and lemon zest, you don't strictly need them either, but they help add back in a little of the acidity and tartness that we lose by adding the mascarpone. The final step is to add in our eggs and yolks, so get those ready. I'm using the 2-shell method here, and then putting them into a separate container. We're going with extra yolks instead of whole eggs, because we don't need the extra volume and proteins of the egg whites, which can hold a lot of air in our cheesecake. But we still need the lecithin and lipoproteins in the yolks to act as emulsifiers, helping our cheesecake hold its form better and making it smooth, thick, and custardy. We want to whisk our eggs outside of our cheesecake so we don't incorporate any more air than we have to into the batter. And just a note, before you add in your eggs, give your batter a taste for sweetness. While I'm using 3/4 of a cup of sweetener in my recipe, I happen to like my cheesecakes a little less sweet than most other people seem to, so feel free to adjust this amount to taste. If you're satisfied with the sweetness, go ahead and add in the eggs a little bit at a time while beating your batter. It's important that you add your eggs gradually, not all at once. Eggs added in small amounts blend more homogeneously and quickly than large quantities of eggs added all at once. Remember the principle of cohesion. Like is attracted to like. So the more egg we add in at once, the more the egg will clump together with itself inside the rest of the batter, requiring more blending to break apart, which again will lead to overmixing of your other ingredients and more air in your final batter. At this point, your crust should be ready to come out of the oven, so go ahead and take it out. But we're not ready to pour in our cheesecake mixture just yet. We need to let our crust cool. If we add our cheesecake batter to a hot pan, all the fat in the cheesecake batter will melt and pool at the bottom, ruining our final cheesecake. To keep that from happening, we're going to go ahead and pop the pan in the freezer for a couple minutes, just to cool off the crust before pouring in our cheesecake mix. It should only need a minute or two. It's at this point you can start prepping for your water bath. You'll need about 2 quarts of 200-degree water, so get your kettle started. Cheesecake is a delicate custard, and in a dry oven, if exposed to direct heat alone, it's prone to cook unevenly and dry out. Rapid changes in temperature and humidity cause cheesecakes to crack. By cooking the cheesecake in a water bath, we slow down the cooking process and increase the humidity of our oven, allowing the cheesecake's temperature to change more gradually, hopefully preventing cracks. Springform pans have a tendency to not be watertight, so we're going to need some wide, heavy-duty foil to wrap our pan in before we surround it with a pool of water. Once your crust is cool, take your springform pan out of the freezer and wrap it in 2 layers of heavy-duty foil before putting it in the roasting pan. If you can't find wide, heavy-duty foil, consider using a plastic crock-pot liner or some saran wrap underneath the foil first to add 1 more layer of protection. Whatever works for you, just make sure it's sealed so water can't get inside. There's no sense in going to all this work just to end up with a soupy cheesecake and a soggy crust. Once your pan is prepared, pour in your batter, scraping every last bit in with a rubber spatula. Then use that spatula to smooth out your cheesecake so it's even. It's a good idea too to slam down the pan a few times to relieve stress and make any air bubbles that might be trapped inside rise to the surface before baking. Put that into your roasting pan and add in your boiling water, just enough to come a little up the sides of your pan. It's at this point that you can carefully transfer it into your oven. We're going to let our cheesecake bake for anywhere from 40 minutes to 1 hour and 10 minutes, depending on how quickly our cheesecake is done. How do you know when it's done? Do the jiggle test. Tap the side of your cheesecake with a spoon. If the whole cheesecake wiggles edge to edge, it's not ready. If only a 3 to 4 inch mass in the center wiggles, but the edges don't, it's ready. Err on the side of jigglier. One of the #1 mistakes in cooking cheesecake is to overcook it. Cheesecake will continue to cook for quite a while after you turn off your oven, so if you bake it until the whole thing is set, you'll end up way overcooking the outside edges, leading to a chalky, crumbly, flavorless cheesecake. Once it seems like your cheesecake is set around the outside edge, but still jiggly in the center, shut off your oven and prop the door open with a wooden spoon, leaving the cheesecake inside. We don't want the cheesecake to cool too rapidly, so leaving it in a turned-off steamy oven allows it to cool down gradually. Remember, rapid changes in temperature create cracks. Once it's been in there an hour, take it out, cover it with foil, and put it in the fridge. This has to wait at least 4 hours, but preferably overnight for the best texture. Don't rush this part. You just spent hours working on a cheesecake. Don't ruin it by being impatient. After that time, you can take it out, take off the top foil, and run a small knife along the outside edge to loosen it from the pan. Take the rest of the foil off, and now it's time for the moment of truth. Gently pop the side piece of your springform pan off, then gaze upon your beautiful creation. All that's left is to cut the cheesecake. The best way to do this is by wetting your knife in hot water and wiping it down with a cloth. Do this after each cut, or the residue from the previous cut will cling to the next cut and make for a jagged edge. Another tip is to cut 2 slices before you remove your first, which allows the first to have a little more give, making for a cleaner final slice. And isn't that just beautiful? All that's left is to decorate with some whipped cream, a slice of lemon, and a berry for the Instagram photos, and dig in. So there you have it. Beautiful, keto-friendly cheesecake. Under 3 net carbs per slice. And super simple to make. I hope you give it a try soon. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you loved it and want to see more, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next recipe. I always love hearing feedback, so I'll be hanging around in the comments to answer any questions. See you next time.